So let's get started. Thank you all for attending the webinar. Thank you all for registering and attending the webinar. I really appreciate that. So we'll get started. So the topic that I'm going to present today is called investigating malware using memory forensics. Before I get started, let me talk about why this presentation. As you all are aware, there is an increase in the number of cyber attacks targeting different sectors. So there are attackers or adversaries behind these sectors. They have different motives. The motive may be cyber espionage, political espionage, sabotage, financial gain, whatever may be the motive. They use malicious programs to infect their targets, which means from a security standpoint and from an incident response standpoint, we need to understand how to analyze the sample, how to investigate, and how to defend against such attacks. So in this presentation, I'm going to introduce you to a technique named memory forensics, and I'll show you how you can use memory forensics to investigate malware samples with the help of various demonstrations. Okay. So before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Monappa. I work for Cisco's incident response team. I am part of a team within Cisco, within the incident response team called Threat Intelligence Team, where I mainly focus on investigation of advanced cyber attacks and research on the advanced cyber attacks. I'm also the author of the book Learning Malware Analysis. And I'm also the member of Black Hat Review Board, so where I review papers for Black Hat Asia, Black Hat US, and Black Hat Europe. And I'm also a co-founder of a cybersecurity community named SysInfo, which we started so that the security researcher can share their knowledge. So we organize free meets. It's in Bangalore. So in case and there are some content on this website as well. So if you're interested, you can visit this sysinfo.com, as in cysinfo.com. So you'll find various resources on that website if you're interested. And also, I'm a creator of a sandbox named Limon. This is for analyzing Linux malware. In case if your interest is to analyze Linux malware samples, then this is open source and it's on GitHub. So GitHub repository, you can download it and use it for analyzing Linux malware samples. And I'm also winner of Volatility plugin contest 2016. In case if you're not familiar with what Volatility is, you will be familiar with what Volatility is in this presentation. Okay, so to keep it simple, so it's a advanced memory forensic framework. Okay, so again, you'll get to know what it is in some time. And I've also presented and conduct trainings at various conferences, which include Black Hat, First BrewCon, and also I'll be conducting training at ZeefCon as well. So the registration for that is open. So in case if you're interested after the session, if you think you want to register for the training, that is open as well. Okay. So that's about me. Now coming to the topic of what is memory forensics and why memory forensics. Memory forensics is an investigation technique which involves analyzing the computer's RAM for forensic artifacts. So what you're doing is you are analyzing the computer's RAM to extract malicious artifacts from the RAM. So how exactly it's done? With the help of demonstration, I'll show you a few examples that should give you an idea. So to put it in simple terms, memory forensics is an investigation technique in which you are analyzing the memory image of a computer's RAM or RAM of a suspect system to extract forensic artifacts. And why do you want to do memory forensics? The reason is the computer's memory stores valuable information that contains runtime state of the system. So now, by acquiring the memory and investigating it, you'll be able to determine which applications are running on the system, which objects the application is accessing, loaded kernel drivers, loaded DLLs, and so on. So there are a lot of information that you can extract. So for this reason, the memory forensics is used in incident response and investigation. And also one more reason why you want to do memory forensics is that some malware samples may not write the malicious component to disk. I will show you one of the example little later. Okay, so some malware samples may not write the component to hard disk at all. So in such case, hard disk forensics will not help or live forensics will not help. That's where the memory forensics can be useful to find the malicious artifacts, which is only in the memory. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why you do memory forensics. And then what are the steps in the memory forensics? So these are the two general steps that you will perform when you do memory forensics. The first one is memory acquisition, where you are acquiring the memory of a computer, of a suspect system. That is, we call it dumping the memory image. So you're dumping the memory of a target machine to a disk. Okay. Once you acquire the memory, the second step is memory analysis. So once you have the memory image, you will be analyzing the memory image to identify the malicious artifacts. So these are the two simple steps. So this presentation mainly focuses on memory analysis. But in the next slide, I'm going to quickly show you some of the tools that you can use to acquire the memory. So that depends from organization to organization and so on. Okay. Now, looking at the memory acquisition, like I said, it's a process of acquiring the volatile memory. That means RAM, which is a volatile memory, to a non-volatile storage, which is a file on the disk. So you are dumping the memory, computer RAM, to a file on the disk, which is the memory image, and you'll be analyzing that memory image to get all the to determine the information related to the malware. Now, depending on whether you want to acquire from a memory from a physical machine or a virtual machine, you have different options. Now, here are some of the tools that I've mentioned on physical machine. These are only some of the tools. There are many ways to acquire memory, but these are some of the tools that you can use to acquire the memory. Some of these tools are free. Some of them you can download after registering on the website, and some are commercial. Okay. But if your intention is to acquire the memory and do memory forensics on a test machine or a lab machine, what you can do is you can use a virtual machine. So when you suspend the virtual machine, what will happen is the memory, the virtual machine's memory is returned to a file with an extension of .vmem. That will be your memory image. Now, when do you want to do that? Let's say, for example, you have a malware sample and you want to do memory forensics on that sample. So what you can do is you can execute that malware sample in a virtual machine and then suspend the VM. That the virtual machine's memory is dumped to a file with an extension of .vmem, which will be your memory image. That will be the memory image of your infected system. So now you can take that and do memory analysis. Okay. So this is memory acquisition. This is the only slide about memory acquisition. Now let's assume that you already acquired the memory. The next step is to, remember I told you 2 steps. One is memory acquisition. The second is memory analysis. The next step is to analyze the memory. To analyze the memory, you need a tool that will allow you to parse the memory image and get relevant information. The tool that you'll be using is named Volatility. Okay, so that's the tool that I'll be showing in this demonstration. Okay, so what is Volatility? It's an open source advanced memory forensic framework. It is written in Python. It allows you to extract forensic artifacts from memory image of Windows, Mac OS X, or Linux system. And also it supports 32-bit and 64-bit versions of this operating system. Now, what you need to know for this demonstration, for this webinar, is that Volatility is a plugin-based system. That means if you want to extract certain information, you'll use certain plugins. For example, if you want to extract a process, you'll use a particular plugin. If you want to list network connections, you'll use a different plugin. Okay, so it's a plugin-based system. It will be clear in some time. Okay. Now, before I move on to the demonstration, I just want to quickly talk about the general syntax of Volatility. So how do you use Volatility to analyze the memory image? This is the script. This is the Volatility script, vol.py. With -f option, you specify the full path to the memory image. Okay. Now, this is the memory image that you acquire, right? So you specify the full path to the memory image, and then you have to supply something called as profile. The profile tells Volatility which operating system and the architecture the memory was acquired from. Okay, that is, the Volatility needs to know that so that it can parse appropriate structures to extract relevant information. Okay, I'll come to this profile in some time, and then you will run the plugin. This keeps varying. The plugin can be, depending on what type of information you want to extract from the memory, you will run appropriate plugins. For example, if you want to extract a process information, you will run a particular plugin, which I'll cover in some time. Then suppose, let's say, this is the syntax that you'll be seeing throughout the demonstration. Let's say the profile, you don't know what the profile is. That's what this command is, second command is. In case if you don't know what the profile is, what you can do is you can run the image info plugin. That will tell you what is the profile, and that you can use it here. Okay. Just to give you an idea how it looks, this is the example. Okay. So here what I'm doing is I'm running a plugin to list all the process running on the system. Notice it's the same syntax, Python, vol.py, which is the volatility script. With -f option, I am specifying the memory image. Notice here, this is the memory image that was acquired using either it could be one of the tools that I mentioned earlier, or it could be a virtual machine memory image. By suspending the memory image, you get this. Okay. So once you get the memory image, you'll use that memory image here. And then with profile, notice this profile was supplied by running the previous plugin that I said, image info. When you run that plugin, it will give you the profile. You can use that profile here. And then this is the plugin part. Here, my intention was to list all the process running on the system. What I've done is I'm running a plugin named PS list, which is showing me all the list of process from this machine, which is Windows 7 machine in this case, which is from the memory image. Okay. So this is the basics of volatility. From now onwards, it's all going to be demonstration so that you get to know how to use volatility to investigate the malware. Okay. So the first demonstration is let's analyze a memory of an infected system. The malware is called Keybase, which this is the malware that is used in some of the targeted attacks as well. So to help you understand better, I have a scenario. So let's say this is the scenario. You are investigating a attack. Okay, so let's say a user in your organization suspects that his system is infected after opening an attachment that came in via email. Okay, so he received an email, he opened an attachment, he thinks that, okay, he got infected. He contacts you. Let's say you are the incident responder. What you have done is, let's assume that you already collected the memory image from that host. Okay, so that's named infected.raw. Now, how do you start your investigation? So let's look at that. Okay, so I have a video demo for all this demo so that it's easy to understand. So let me bring up the first demonstration. Let me make sure that it's visible on the screen. Okay, so it looks like it is visible. Okay, so first, how do you start your investigation? You normally start with what you know. We know that user probably received an email, he opened the attachment, and he probably got infected. So what I'm doing right now is, this is the memory image, infected.raw. I'm running a plugin named PS list to list all the process running on the system. First, because I want to see which applications are running on the system. In this case, notice it is telling me that the suspect system is running outlook.exe, whose process ID is 4068. Okay, so which means looks like we are in the right direction. But also notice from the process listing, there is one more process which is suspicious, which is doc6.exe, which looks like a malicious program. I don't know yet. We'll have to investigate, but that looks suspicious for now. Okay. Notice the PS list plugin is listing the process, but it does not tell you much about it. So what we'll do is, there are different plugins to do different kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is now, I'm going to run another plugin. Notice PS3 plugin. I'm running this plugin named PS3. What PS3 plugin does is, so PS3 plugin displays I'll pause the video. Okay, so the PS3 plugin displays all it gives you the parent-child relationship of the process. For example, the one that I'm highlighting, if I look at it, you see that explorer.exe, in this case, the child process is indented to the right-hand side, and it is prepended with a dot character. Okay, so notice you can tell that explorer.exe started vmtools.exe, and it also started outlook.exe. That is normal, because when you double click in a program, it is explorer.exe which starts that program. So that's okay for now. But if you further look at it, you will see that outlook.exe in turn started excel.exe. Okay, that tells you that probably the user received an email containing an Excel sheet which he opened, which is opened by excel.exe. So it looks like that. And then what is interesting here is this: Excel in turn launches command.exe, which should not happen normally, probably because the Excel contained an exploit or a macro, which probably made it to launch command.exe. And notice the command.exe in turn started doc6.exe. So now you have an idea of what probably happened on the system. So this is one way of looking at the parent-child relationship. Before I proceed further, let me show you one more way of listing the parent-child relationship. So I'm going to quickly forward a bit. Okay, so yeah. So here is a command named pscan. Okay, plugin named pscan. Let me tell you what I'm doing here. Okay, so let me show you that. So what I'm doing is I made a mistake with the command. Okay, so this is the command. Notice this is a memory image. I'm running a plugin named pscan. The pscan is like pslist plugin. It also lists the process running on a system, but it uses a different approach. Now what I'm telling is, I'm telling write that process information to a in a dot format and write it to this file infected dot dot. I'll tell you why in some time. So basically what I'm doing right now is I'm extracting the process information and writing to this particular file infected dot dot. Why? Because it is dumped. Notice that it is written to the disk infected dot dot. Now what I'll do is I can open that dot file as I'm showing here. I'm opening that dot file by right-clicking and opening with X dot, or you can open it with any graph visualization software. And when I do that, it will show me the parent-child relationship. So here you see that the same thing. Now it's showing in a visual format. So for example, here notice explorer.exe started Outlook. Outlook in turn started excel.exe, probably because the user received an email containing an Excel sheet. And he opened it, because of which Excel opened that Excel sheet. And also notice the Excel in turn started command.exe, which should not happen normally, probably because that Excel sheet was a malicious Excel sheet, which contained macro or an exploit, which started command.exe. The command.exe in turn started the suspicious process. Okay. Now you know the infection chain, what happened on the system. Now we can also further investigate. Let me show that. So let me clear the screen. And okay, so what I'm doing right now is, now what I want to know is, I'm using the process ID of the command.exe. So let me rewind a bit, okay, to show you what it is. I've copied here, copied the process ID of command.exe, and I'm using that. Why? Because I want to know 4056 is the process ID of command.exe. The reason why I did this was I want to know what is the command line argument passed to command.exe, because my objective is to understand why command.exe launched that doc6.exe, the suspicious process. So when I look at the command line, notice command.exe is passed with this argument. Notice that command.exe is invoking PowerShell. Notice it's bypassing the execution policy. And also notice here, it is downloading a file using PowerShell, which is a file named yboss.exe from the command and control server. And it is dropping it in the temp directory. So now I know that command.exe was used to launch PowerShell to download the malicious program onto the disk. And then this is interesting. So here it adds a registry entry, which is shown here. And that registry value is modified to contain the full path to the dropped executable file. And then what it does is it launches event viewer. So why does it do that? Why attackers did that is because when you launch event viewer, which is a legitimate process on the system, the event viewer launches another process named mmc.exe. Now to do that, it will consult this registry value. Now, because this registry is hijacked with the full path to the malicious executable, what will happen is event viewer will launch this doc6.exe. So why attackers want event viewer to launch that executable is because event viewer runs with high integrity level. And by event viewer launching this malicious process, that process will also run with high integrity level. That is one thing. Second, it will also bypass the UAC, that is user access control, the prompt that you get when you right click and run as an administrator. That prompt will not be shown. Okay, so this is the reason why attackers use this technique. It's a registry hijack technique and also UAC bypass technique that the attackers used to execute this malicious program. Now I have some idea of what happened on the system, right? So we know that user probably received an email. The user opened the email containing an Excel sheet, which was launched by Excel. And because probably that Excel contained malicious macro, which executed command.exe, the command.exe in turn launched PowerShell. The PowerShell went ahead and downloaded this executable and it dropped to the disk and it added these entries. Okay. Now you may ask, why was PowerShell not in the process listing? That is because PowerShell did its job and it terminated. So the PS does not show you the terminated process. But looking at the command line arguments, you get to know that a command.exe was used to launch PowerShell, which downloaded a sample and dropped onto the disk. Okay. Another thing that you can do, what else you can do? Okay. Now, notice I want to know what is the full path of doc6.exe, this suspicious process. How can I do that? I can take the process ID of that process, and then I can again use the command line plugin and give the process ID of doc6.exe. That will give me the full path. Notice here, it is running from this part temp directory, which is the same directory where the PowerShell downloaded the executable from the command and control server and dropped it. Okay. So now we have an idea of what happened on the system. Now what else we can do? We can dump the executable. Now, once you have a malicious executable, we can dump that executable from the memory, that is doc6.exe, to the hard disk. So to do that, I'm using proc dump plugin. And I specify the process ID that I want to dump, which is the process ID of doc6.exe. And what I can do is I can specify the folder where I want to dump that process from the memory. Okay, the reason why I'm doing this, maybe you may want to do this for further analysis. Maybe you want to do dynamic analysis or static analysis or reverse engineer the sample and so on. But for the sake of demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm dumping it. Notice doc6.exe is dumped to a disk with this particular name. Okay. Now I can take it, analyze it, run it with antivirus, run Yara signatures on that, or reverse engineer it or debug it. It's up to you as to what you want to do. But for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to submit this executable to VirusTotal just to show you that it is malicious. Okay, so when I upload this sample to VirusTotal, you will see that our 52 antivirus vendors out of 63 are detecting it as malicious. Okay, so that's the So the objective of demonstration was to introduce you to volatility plugins, and also I'll show you how memory forensics can be used for investigation. And also, to some extent, you also get to know what is the attacker tactics and techniques that the attackers are using. Okay, so that was about the first demonstration. The first demonstration was to show you some of the plugins and also introduce you to volatility, and also to show you how volatility can be used for performing memory forensics for your investigation. And also, like I said, we were able to determine some of the attacker techniques. Okay, you can do a lot with that. The second demonstration will introduce you to few more plugins and few more attacker tactics. Okay, so this is demo 2. So again, let's take a scenario. The scenario is this. Okay, let's say you are part of a monitoring team. You are monitoring for malicious alerts, suspicious alerts. So let's say your security device is alerting on a malware callback communication. That is, it's telling that one of your hosts in your network, let's say this is the host 192.168.1.70, is talking to a command and control server IP address, which is this IP address on port 80. So you suspect, because you got an alert from one of the security device, you suspect that this host to be infected. So let's assume that you have already acquired the memory image, which is named downdelf.vmem, which is the name of the malware. Again, this is another malware that is used in some of the targeted attacks. There are also other names for it, like sednet and so on. Okay, so let's say this is the memory image. Okay, so now how do you start your investigation? Like I said, normally you start with what you know, right? So let me bring up the demo. We know that there is a callback communication from the suspect host, that is 192.168.1.70, to a command and control IP address. So we start by running this plugin named NetScan, which lists all the network connections. Okay, so when I do that, you will see that okay, it shows that there was a communication from 192.168. I want you to focus on this entry. So 192.168.1.70. I noticed there is a communication to that IP address on port 80. There was a communication because it's a closed connection. Because of the way this plugin works, it can also determine closed connection. Okay, but also notice I'm not able to determine which process made the communication. I know the system is infected because there was a communication that happened from the system, but I don't know which process made the connection. I want to determine that, right? So to do that, another option is you can take any approach, but one of the things is I can copy this. Okay, so let me forward to the part where I'm doing that. I can copy that IP address, the command and control IP address, and I can use another plugin named YaraScan. So what YaraScan allows you to do is, using YaraScan, you can scan any pattern in the memory. The pattern that I'm scanning is the IP address, which is the command and control IP address. If that pattern is found in the memory, it will tell me in which process memory this pattern was found. Okay. So when I play this, notice what happens. You will see that this pattern was okay. So here, okay, this pattern. Notice this IP address pattern was found in the memory of rundll32.exe. Also here as well, this pattern was found in the memory address of rundll32.exe. So that tells me that probably rundll32.exe made the connection to the command and control server. But if you're familiar with Windows operating system, you know that rundll32.exe is a legitimate executable on the Windows operating system. But attackers also can use rundll32.exe to load a DLL and execute code within a DLL. Okay, so if you put all these things together, you can probably tell that, okay, rundll32.exe was making a connection, probably because it was made to load a malicious DLL. How do I verify that? Okay, just to revisit what happened, we started with one simple information that there was a malicious communication to the command and control IP address. What we did the network connection, we found a closed connection. Then I took the IP address and I scan. I'm using it as a pattern to see in which process memory this pattern was found. I found that pattern in the memory address of rundll32.exe. Now I am suspecting that rundll32.exe probably loaded a DLL. How do I do that? There is another plugin which allow you to, just forwarding that part, which allow you to list all the DLLs from a particular process, which is named DLL list. DLL list is the name of the plugin. When you run this plugin, you can specify the process ID. In this case, I'm specifying the process ID of rundll32.exe. I'm telling, show me all the DLLs loaded by this process. So when you do that, you will see that in addition to the DLLs that it loaded, it will also show you the command line argument. You can see that rundll32.exe was explicitly loading a DLL. So a command line argument was passed to rundll32.exe to load this DLL and execute a function inside that DLL. Now this could be the malicious function, right? And also notice the path is a non-standard path. Most of the DLLs are loaded from system32 directory, or if it's a 32-bit architecture which is running on 64-bit, 32-bit binary which is running on 64-bit operating system, it will mostly be C Windows syswav64 directory. This is another thing that is suspicious, that maybe malware program dropped this DLL and rundll32.exe was made to load a DLL and execute the code within that DLL. Okay. Also, if I scroll down, you will see that, so you see that the DLL is actually loaded by rundll32.exe. Okay. Now I know that the DLL was actually loaded by rundll32.exe. As a result, what would have happened is rundll32.exe loaded this DLL. As a result of loading a DLL, there is the code within the DLL gets executed, because of which it looks like rundll32.exe is making the network communication. Okay. Now, what else you can do? You can, like how we were able to dump the executable from the memory, you can also dump the DLL from the memory to disk for further analysis. Maybe you can you want to analyze the memory, you want to analyze the DLL, you want to reverse engineer the DLL, or you want to, let's say you want to debug, disassemble the DLL, read the code, whatever it is, you can always dump this DLL from the memory to disk. To do that, what you need is this base address. That is this, in this case, this one, okay, 40000. That is where the DLL is loaded in the run DLL32.exe's memory. So you need that address. Okay, once you have that base address, what you can do is you can use the DLL dump plugin here. Okay, the DLL dump plugin, and you can specify from which process memory you want to dump that DLL, which is undetected.exe's process ID. And then with -b option, I can specify the base address where the DLL is loaded, which is the one that I copied. Okay, just zooming on the part where that is the case. Okay, so this is where it is loaded. I'm specifying that. And one more thing that I need to supply is where you want to dump this DLL. In this case, I'm telling dump this DLL into this folder, which is dump folder. Okay, so when you do that, it will dump the DLL. Notice that DLL is dumped from the memory to hard disk. Now you can analyze it, reverse engineer it, debug it, run it with Yara scanner or run it with Yara AV scanner and so on. But for the sake of demonstration, what I will do is I'm going to submit this file to VirusTotal just to show you that it is malicious. As you can see here, 27 out of 69 AV vendors are detecting this DLL as bad, as malicious. So that's what I'm trying to show here. Now, what else I can do? Now that I know the DLL is bad, there's one more thing that I can find out. Maybe, okay, so who started run DLL32.exe? Which process started it? Okay, if that is in the memory, we'll be able to get that. So how do I do that? So remember the PS3 plugin. Remember the PS3 plugin, which will show me the parent-child relationship. You see here, PS3 plugin. I'm running the PS3 plugin, which will show me the parent-child relationship. When you look at it, you will see that, okay, if you look at this data here, notice the d.exe, some process named d.exe, started run DLL32.exe. So now you can guess what may have happened on the system. The system got infected. The malware was executed on the system. Malware dropped the DLL, and that the full path to the DLL was passed as an argument to run DLL32.exe. Why? So that run DLL32.exe will load the DLL, and the code within the DLL can get executed, thereby performing malicious actions. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, again, this demonstration again was to show you that it's not always executable. The first demonstration focused on the process-related investigation, right? So the attackers can implement their malicious code as an executable, but it's not always the case. Attackers can also implement their malicious code as a DLL. So in that case, this second demonstration was to show you that there are plugins that allow you to investigate DLLs as well. Okay. Again, I'm going to skip some of the screenshots, which is related to the demo that I showed here. Okay. Now let's move on to the third demonstration. So the idea here is, again, like I said, I will not be able to show you every technique that attackers use, but you should get the idea. So the first demonstration where attackers use executable, I also showed you how you can use volatility and memory forensics to investigate that. The second demonstration focused on the DLL, right? Now this demonstration will introduce you to a few more plugins. Okay, so let's take the scenario again. We take this scenario, which is similar to the previous one. Let's say you have an alert from a security device. So let's say there is a callback communication from this host in your network, 192.168.1.60, to a command and control domain on port 1604. Okay, the domain is this, which is showed in the packet capture. Let's say this is the domain the host in your network is talking to. Okay. Now also let's assume that this domain resolves to 192.168.1.100. Okay, so now let's assume that this is the command and control IP address. The reason is because I ran it in an isolated environment. That's why you are seeing a private IP. But in reality, this will be the actual command and control server IP address. The domain is the actual command and control domain, but IP is my host, because I run it in an isolated environment. But let's assume that this is the command and control server. So this is the scenario. How do you start investigating? Let's also assume that you acquired the memory from the system, which is named dc.vmem. How do you start your investigation? Okay. Again, like I said, you start with what you know normally. Okay. So that's the best approach. Otherwise, you will get lost looking at the data. Okay. So let me bring up the demo. Okay. Fine. So let's see. So how do you start? You start again with what you know. We know there was a security alert. There was a callback communication, alert on a callback communication to a command and control IP address. So let's start by listing the network connection. When you do that, you see that there was a connection from that host to this IP address, which is the command and control IP address in this case. And notice the communication was on port, the same port that we saw in the packet capture, which is 1604. Okay. The connection is still active because you can see that it's established. And one more information that you get is which process is making the communication. It is winlogon.exe with a process ID of 1516. So remember this process ID 1516. Okay. So now winlogon.exe is making the connection. Now, if you're familiar with Windows operating system, you know that winlogon.exe, there is a process which is a legitimate process that is running in Windows called winlogon.exe. Now, I don't know whether this winlogon.exe is a legitimate process which is making this malicious communication, or it is a malicious process. Okay, we need to find that out. But what we know is this instance of winlogon.exe is making a connection on port 1604 to the command and control IP address. Okay, we got that information. Okay, so now what can we do to investigate? So what I'm doing here is you can take any approach. Okay, I'm running the PS list plugin. I'm listing all the process and I'm grepping for winlogon process. Okay, on the system, you can see that there are two instances of winlogon.exe running. On a clean system, you will always have one winlogon.exe process running that is there. So I'm guessing that one of them is a legitimate winlogon.exe process, other one is malicious. And if you remember, this was the one that was making the malicious communication, the one with the process ID 1516, right? Okay, so now we have two. One of them should be a clean process, the other one is a malicious one. Now we have a suspect that is 1516 because that was making a malicious communication. Okay, so further investigating, what we'll do is I'm running a PS3 plugin again to look at the parent-child relationship. Maybe I want to know which process started this 1516 and so on. So when I do the PS3 plugin, when I run it, you will see that winlogon.exe process, whose process ID is 460, started winlogon.exe with a process ID 1516. Okay, fine. So legitimate. So it looks like one winlogon process is starting another winlogon.exe process, and the one with 1516 was the one that was making the malicious communication. Okay, so that's one information. Now, what again? I'm going to show you the visual representation of the parent-child relationship using the command which I mentioned earlier, pscan. I'm writing in the dot format, and I'm writing to a file so that I'll show you the visual representation of what happened. It's called dc.dot. If I open that file with, okay, so if I open that file, you will see that this winlogon, okay, this winlogon.exe with a process ID 460 started this process 1516, which was the one that was making the connection. Okay, so now we know that, okay, winlogon.exe started winlogon, but which is the question still remains as to which is the legitimate process. Now, one method is basically I'm like checking for the path from where these two processes are running. First, I'm checking the path of the process whose process ID is 460, winlogon.exe. Now, when I run it, you will see that, okay, pause it. Notice that if you look at it, this is the path. It is running from a legitimate path. This is where the winlogon.exe, the clean winlogon.exe resides. So it looks like this is a legitimate process, the one with the process ID 460. What about the other process? So if I run the same command on another process, which is 1516. Okay, so when I do that, you'll see that, yeah, you'll see that, okay, here the process is, the path is suspicious because it is not C Windows System 32, but just C System 32. So sometimes attackers do that. They use the same name as a legitimate process and they can drop it to a non-standard path and run the process. Now it's telling me that because this winlogon.exe is running from a non-standard path, and also this was the process that was making the malicious communication, now this tells me that this is the malicious process. Okay, so now we have identified the malicious process. Now the question is, okay, why did the legitimate winlogon.exe process start this malicious winlogon.exe? Okay, if you're familiar with malware analysis, there is a persistence technique which can be used to make legitimate winlogon.exe execute another process. That happens in the registry. Okay, so which means I should be able to investigate registry. So there is a plugin named Hive List. What Hive List does is it will show you a list of all the registry hives if it's in the memory. In this case, the registry hives are in the memory. Okay, so most of the registry hives seem to be in the memory, which is good. So what we can do is we can dump all these registry hives from the memory to hard disk using the dump registry plugin. I'm telling run this plugin, dump it to this folder. Dump. So basically you will see that it is dumping all the registry hives to hard disk. Okay, why I'm doing that? I'll come to that in some time. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to the dump folder and I'm going to extract the strings. I'm extracting the strings from all those files. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for that suspicious executable which is running from the non-standard path. That is system32 is the winlogon.exe. When I run that, you will see that there is a reference to that suspicious executable in the software hive, system hive, and also in the NT user dat hive. So the software hive is related to HKey local machine software, that hive. NT user dat is related to HKey current user software. So that is related to that hive. So I now know that there is reference to this malicious executable in these two registry hives. Okay. But it does not tell me which key it is present, where it is present, and so on. The strings does not tell me that. So I will have to do a little bit of registry forensics to get that information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these two registry hives, because most of the persistence happen in HKey local machine software and HKey current user software registry keys. So I'm taking those two registry keys, so which I'm going to show you now. So I'm from the dump directory. So these are the dumped registry hives. I'm taking this software hive and also that NT user dat hive. And I'm going to copy to my virtual machine, which is running Windows. Okay, because I'm going to do some registry forensics. Okay. Okay, so I'm using a tool named Windows Registry Recovery. What I'm going to do is I'm going to load that one of the registry hive. That's the first time loading the software hive. Okay, when I open it, notice what this tool does is it will build the structure of the registry. When I click on the raw data here, if I click on the raw data, it is showing me the registry structure of that HKey LM software, right? So that hive it is showing. Okay, now the HKLM software can consist of hundreds of registry keys. Where do I find that reference to that malicious executable? One method is using the Control F option, that is find feature. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, and I'm looking for that suspicious executable in this registry hive. Okay, see system32 winlogon.exe. Notice that this is C, not C Windows System 32. C System 32 because that's the path where the malicious executable is, right? look for the keys. I'm telling, show me all the keys that contain this entry values and the data. Okay, so when you run it, you'll see that it is searching for the keys. When I play the video, notice it is searching for all the keys. If it finds that key, it will come back and display where it found the entry. In this case, notice it found under this registry key, which is HKey, LM Software, Microsoft, Windows NT, current version, WinLogon. Okay, and where did it find it? It is found in this value, under this value, user init value here. Okay, if I click on that, you'll get a better view. So when I click on that, when I click on the entry, I click on it. Okay, you see here, this is where it is. It is in the WinLogon key and user init value. Under that user init value, it added itself. Why? So let me give a quick background of what is winlogon.exe. So winlogon.exe is a legitimate operating system process running on the system, right? The winlogon.exe is responsible for interactive log on and log off. That is, after you authenticate on the Windows operating system, the winlogon, the legitimate winlogon.exe process starts another process named userinit.exe. To start that process, the winlogon.exe consults this registry value. By default, it is set to only this value, userinit.exe. What malware did was it added an entry which is associated with the malicious executable here. Why? So that after you authenticate, winlogon.exe process will consult this registry value. It will start userinit.exe and it will also start the malicious executable. So that's the reason you saw in the process tree the legitimate winlogon.exe starting the malicious winlogon.exe, which is running from the non-standard path. Okay, so now you should know that why winlogon, that tells me why winlogon.exe started the malicious winlogon.exe. Now what I'm doing is I'm also loading the other hive, nt-user.hive, to see because the string search showed me reference to that executable, right? So I'm loading that to see where this executable is referenced. So again, I use the same technique. I use the Control F feature and run winlogon.exe, right? So it will show me where this entry was present. Notice it was present under run registry key. Some of you may be familiar that this is a registry key used by most malicious programs. This is for persistence. That is, the idea is by adding an entry in the run registry key, attackers can persist on the system. That is, even when the system reboots, this executable, when the system reboots, the operating system will consult this registry key and this executable will be executed by explorer.exe. Okay, fine. So now we know, okay, so how the malware is persisting on the system. There are two entries, one in the winlogon registry key, which is not so well-known technique. The other one is in the run registry key, which is a well-known technique. Okay. Now there are two entries for the malicious executable. Now what we'll do is we'll go back to memory forensics. And also there is one more question in my mind that, okay, if there are two entries, okay, play that. Okay, so wait, I'll pause the video. So if there are two entries for malicious winlogon.exe, I should have seen two instances of malicious winlogon.exe running, but that was not the case. We saw only one instance of malicious winlogon. The other instance was a clean executable, clean winlogon.exe. Why is that? There is a concept called mutex. When it comes to malware analysis, you will probably you probably heard about this concept called mutex. Why malware uses mutex is that to make sure that only one instance of the process is running. Because there are two entries, but there is only one instance running on the system, I suspect that probably the malware is using a mutex. How do I know that? I can use this plugin named handles. I'm telling, show me the handles, mutex handles. Okay. Open, come on, it did come up. Okay, so I'm asking, okay, show me all the handles open to the mutex by this process 1516, which is the malicious winlogon.exe. When you do that, mutex is not a bad thing. But attackers can also use mutex. Now, if you're familiar, you'll see that all these are legitimate mutex except this one, PC_mutex, right? So that tells me that, okay, malware is creating a mutex to make sure that only one instance of malicious program is running. That's the reason why, even though there were 2 entries in the registry key, you only found one instance of malicious process running. Okay. Now this is, if you just do Google_mutex, you will find that it is associated with the dark comment rat. So this is the pattern that it uses to create a mutex. Okay. Now that gives me answer as to why only one instance of malicious process was running. Now, what else we can do? A malware can also inject a code into a legitimate process. Now, to do that, a malware first needs to open a handle to the process. Okay. But what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if this process, the malicious process, is it opening handle to any process. Now, when I run the plugin, you will see that malicious process, the winlogon.exe process, is opening a handle to explorer.exe. So if a malware wants to inject code into a legitimate process like Explorer, the first step would be to open a handle to that process. Because in Windows, again, it's a Windows internal stuff, but all the system resources are called objects. To access any object, it has to open a handle to that object. So in this case, process is also an object. So a malware process is opening a handle to explorer.exe. So which tells me that probably this malware sample is also injecting code into explorer.exe. Okay. Now we can further continue our investigation. Okay, how do I know that a code is injected into explorer.exe? Okay, so let me introduce you to another plugin named Malfind. What Malfind plugin does is here, Malfind plugin scans the process memory looking for suspicious memory allocation. So if a code is injected, it creates some suspicious memory regions. Okay. So what I'm saying is I'm running Malfind plugin on that explorer.exe process, whose process ID is 1504. Why? To see if there are any suspicious memory regions that are allocated in explorer.exe. Okay. So when I do that, you will notice that, okay, here, something interesting. Here, if I scroll down, notice here, in the explorer.exe process memory, at this address 4A800000, there is an executable. This is the file signature of an executable. It tells me that, okay, there is an executable at this address in explorer.exe's memory. So what? What is suspicious is that the memory protection. Normally, when an executable is normally loaded, if an operating system loads an executable normally, it will have a memory protection of page execute write copy, not page execute read write. Okay. Now, here, presence of an executable in the explorer.exe's memory with a suspicious memory protection tells me that there is a code that is injected or an executable or a DLL that is injected into the address of explorer.exe. And this is the address where it is injected. Okay. Now, what else we can do? Now that we know there is a code that is injected, what else I can do? I can take this address and dump this section of memory. To do that, there's one more plugin named, I'm going to copy that address. Okay. I'm going to run a plugin named WAD dump, which dumps something called as WAD region. Okay. So you see here, I'm specifying the address. I'm telling dump this region of memory, and I'll have to specify where to dump that region of memory. Okay. So it is in the dump folder. So now that region of memory should be dumped from the memory to hard disk. Okay. So you see that, notice that region of memory, which is 4A8000, and the end address is this, is dumped to the disk, hard disk. Okay. Now you can take it, reverse engineer it, analyze it. But again, for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to just show you that it is an executable file. When I run the file command on that, it tells you that the dumped region of memory is a P32 executable, which is an executable file. Also, we can submit this file to VirusTotal just to show you again that it is malicious. That's exactly what I'm doing. When I submit that dumped file, you will notice that 49 out of 56 engines detected it as bad, and notice that some of them detected as Comet, Dark Comet. That is the name of the program. That is a malicious program. Okay. So, but this demonstration again was to give you an idea that how attackers need not use executable, it need not use DLL, it can inject code into a legitimate process to perform malicious actions. So I'm just skipping the screenshots and going to the next one example. That brings us, now we saw in the previous demonstration that executable can be injected into the memory of another process. That brings us to the topic of code injection. So I'm going to show you the example of Zeusbot. But before that, let me talk a bit about code injection. So what is code injection and why attackers use code injection techniques? Code injection is a technique of injecting code into a target process. Now notice there is a malware process which will inject code into the memory of a target process. Now, this target process will normally be legitimate process such as explore.exe that we saw earlier, or svchost.exe and so on. So the objective is this. The malware process will inject code into the memory of a target process. The code can be an executable, it can be a DLL, or it can be a shell code. Okay. Now, the question is, why would an attacker want to inject code into a legitimate process? One reason is to force this legitimate process to execute the malicious code. Why? That way it can bypass the whitelisting software. If it's an executable such as Explorer, the whitelisting software will allow it. It will not flag it as bad, right? Because the path of Explorer is still same. Only in the memory of Explorer.exe, there is a malicious code, right? That's one reason. That is to force a legitimate process to execute the malicious code. Second reason is every process on Windows operating system calls API functions, which are implemented in the DLL. Now, by first step, by injecting the code, when this legitimate process calls a legitimate API, that API can be redirected to the malicious code. Now, this malicious code can then block the API, intercept the input parameters, or it can delete the return value. For example, just to help you understand, let's say, for example, there is a security product, or let's say our attacker wants to steal what you are sending to the bank website. From the Internet Explorer. Let's say this is the Internet Explorer process. What attackers can do is they can inject code into the Internet Explorer process. When you type something on the Internet Explorer process and when you send the data to the bank website, what will happen is the Internet Explorer process will call an API function, which is implemented in a DLL. Now that can be hooked and redirected to the malicious function. Now what malicious function can then do is it can read which arguments are passed to that function. That will be what you're sending to the bank website. It can read that, it can save it, it can steal it, and send it to the attacker. So this is one example why attackers can hook the API. Okay. In the same manner, let's say, for example, attackers want to hide a process running on a system. Let's say task manager, you run task manager. Task manager calls a function within the DLL that can be redirected to a malicious function, and which can then see which process are running, and it can delete an entry and it can give it back to task manager. That way, the task manager will display all the process except the the process that the attacker wants to hide. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why attackers use code injection. So basically, in case if you're new to this, I don't want you to get confused. So basically, the reason why attackers inject code is to force a legitimate process to execute malicious code, and also to hook a API to alter the functionality of a process. Okay, so here is an example of a malware sample named Zeusbot, which did that. First, notice the Zeusbot. When I run the malfind plugin, notice similar to the previous demo, it injected a code in this address. Remember this address 6F10000. Notice there is an executable in this region. And notice what is suspicious. This memory region is suspicious because the memory protection is page execute read write. If there is an executable that is normally loaded, it should have a memory protection of page execute write copy. So now I know that the code is injected in the explore.exe at this address. Okay. In the next screenshot, what's happening is when I run a plugin named API hook, you will see that explorer.exe, every program, legitimate process, every process on Windows have to call the API. In this case, what it's telling is that explorer.exe, which relies on HTTP send request API, which is implemented in this DLL, win99.dll, which is supposed to be at this address, okay, is redirected to this address 6F1EC48. Remember, this address falls within the address range of the injected executable. So what's happening is explorer.exe, when it calls this API, it will be redirected to this malicious function within that injected executable. Okay, so that's what is happening. Now, also, if you look at the disassembly of the actual function, that is HTTP send request function, it will tell you how exactly it is redirecting to this address. If you look at it, you will see that at the start of the function, there is a jump instruction, which is jumping outside this range. So basically, it is jumping to this address here. So that's how it is redirecting. First, it injected the code. When the explorer.exe calls this function, it will be redirected to this address because of this jump instruction at the start of the function. Okay, but the idea is that maybe it depends on the objective. It could be by you doing that, it can hook the API, it can block the API, it can read the input parameters, it can also filter the output data. Okay, so that's the idea of code injection. The idea of, again, showing you this example is that you can, when there is a code injection and an API hooking, you can use some of the API Volatility plugins to inspect that. And also, like I said, so every attack is different. Each malware author can implement different functionality. In the first demo, I showed you that they used executable, right? And we saw how to investigate that. In the second demonstration, we saw that the attackers implemented a DLL. We saw how to implement that, how to investigate that. And in the third demonstration, I also introduced you to a few plugins which helped with the registry analysis and also the code injection. In this example, you can see that you can also inspect the API hooking. Okay, so with the interest of time, you can do a lot more with memory forensics, but with the interest of time, I've almost come to the end of demonstration. You can also investigate hollow process injection techniques. You can investigate rootkit techniques and so on. But because it's a 1 hour presentation and I'll not be able to cover everything in this presentation, so I'm going to end I've almost come to the end of the presentation. So the key takeaways from this presentation is that attackers use various techniques, like they use persistence technique, they use code injection techniques, they use rootkit techniques to execute their malicious code, which means as a security defender and from a security incident response perspective, we need to understand how these techniques work so that we can investigate, we can detect such attacks that's happening in your network, right? So that's the idea. And memory forensics is one such technique. Again, you can, this is, I've shown the example using memory forensics. You can apply this technique not just for memory forensics, but any other you can also use this methodology for if you have data source that gives similar information, like the process information, process command line information, loaded DLLs, and so on. But in this case, because the topic was on memory forensics, I used memory forensics to show you how you can investigate. Okay, I hope it was helpful. In case if you want to learn further, this is my book, Learning Malware Analysis. If you are new to malware analysis and you want to get started, maybe this book should help you. It is available in all the online stores. So depending on which region you are from, if you are in US or in India, I know we have Amazon.in, but I'm not sure in your region. You can just check the online bookstores. You should be able to find it. And one more thing that I would like to mention is that we have an upcoming training at ZeefCon. If you, I think it's, let me quickly show that as well. Hopefully, I think it's, so that's the upcoming training. So that would be a 3-day training in ZeefCon. I think it's in the available training. Okay, so yeah. So this is the training titled Practical Approach to Malware Analysis and Memory Forensics. In case if you're interested, it is happening on October 7th. Feel free to register that if that is the case. If not, anyway, we can always keep in touch. So this is my Twitter ID and always this is my email ID. If you have any questions, feel free to send me your questions. I hope, I don't know if I have enough time for the questions, but still, I just want to check with Andres if there is, if I can take any questions, or let me see the chat to see if there are any questions. I don't see. Can you share the slides? Yeah, sure. I think I can do that. What book has the forensic techniques for? Yeah, so I think I already mentioned the book, right? So hopefully that answers the question. Which book has forensic analysis techniques? Volatility dump and executable, or DLL? Okay, so there is one question, I think. When you use proc dump, volatility to dump. No, the one that is on the file system will be different, because in the memory, during the runtime, it'll be similar, but not exactly the same. Okay, so because when it's running, if you remember, the variables can be populated, the imported functions are loaded and stuff like that. The memory, the one that you find on the hard disk, the one that you find in the memory are similar, but not exactly same. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so it will submit to virus total. Are there hashes that make more sense? Okay, so the reason why you are able to see the hashes is because I already submitted it before, but it's not going to be the same hash on the file system because it's different, right? Imp hash is one. Yeah, like I said, there is imp hash technique that you can use. There is also another thing called SSD hash, import hash. What else? Yeah, so those techniques can be used to identify. That is the static analysis technique that we normally cover in the training. Yes, you can use imp hash to determine similar samples if you have the malware sample. Okay, and also on VirusTotal, I think there is also option for hunting based on the import hash. Also, if you have Yara rules, you can also do that. I hope that answers the question. Okay. So let me see if I did. I miss any question? I don't think. Cool. So with that, I think I've come to the end of the presentation. I thank you very much. I really enjoyed presenting. Thank you again for the invite, and also thank you all for attending. I really appreciate you taking time and registering for the presentation. I hope it was useful. I wanted to make it practical. I hope you learned something from it. Okay, so again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I would be happy to answer your question.